Hello everyone, good day to you all. Welcome to the first video in a new AK upgrades series I'm going to be doing here. Going back to the roots a little bit, as the first gun video I did was AK upgrades, first series of course as well. Today, going to be starting with the trigger on this Wasser 10. So you can tell from the title, we're going to be installing, or actually I already have installed, we're going to be talking about the LBE Unlimited G3 fire control group. So you can see there's the box that it came in. So I'll go ahead and get started talking about the installation of this trigger and how it went. Originally, I had planned to show the installation process, and I did actually attempt to record it, but it just did not turn out very well at all. So I cut all that footage out. Suffice to say, it's a very normal trigger installation. I would recommend just look up any video out there on YouTube. There's a lot of really good ones showing how to replace the trigger on an AK. This is no different. It is absolutely identical to your standard trigger. One thing to note on this trigger specifically, when you buy it, as I showed here in this box, what you get is of course all of the regular fire control components. You have the hammer, you have the trigger itself, and then you also get this sort of, I believe, I'm not sure exactly what you'd call this, but you have this on the Tapco triggers as well. You have this sleeve that goes through, if you can see right there, and it just holds the disconnector in place. You get one of those as well. However, you do not get any springs with this fire control group. So you will need to reuse the springs that you already have on hand with this trigger. So I probably wouldn't recommend this if you're doing a brand new build and you simply don't have those on hand and you want to get everything in one package. Or if you really end up wanting to get this trigger after this review, or just, you know, based on other stuff that you've seen, then just keep in mind that you will need to buy springs separately in that case. I will say the only bit of difficulty I had during the installation was actually removing the old hammer. Mine was particularly stuck. Of course, you need to release all the spring tension and all that, and I did, but just something about my particular washer, the pin was just really jammed in. Eventually did get it out with just a mallet and just being very careful, of course, not to dent the receiver or anything like that, and all is good. As you can see, this is in here now. So when you actually get this trigger installed, one thing you're going to notice, and this goes for pretty much all of the standard AK triggers, but the one I am going to be particularly comparing it to in this video is the Tapco G2, as this is what I replaced. And I can do a few comparisons with the Arsenal trigger, as that's what I have in my SLR 104, and that's not one that I'm going to be changing out. But one of the first things you're going to notice here is if you look at the trigger itself, quite a flat profile, which I do like. And if you compare that to the Tapco, it follows a pretty standard AK trigger profile. It's very curved. Now, this is quite a bit just personal preference on what you prefer for your triggers. Personally, I do like slightly more flat triggers. I don't mind a curved trigger, but I don't like an extremely curved trigger like you see on a lot of the quite older antique firearms. So I am quite a big fan of this, the profile of it. It's very comfortable. Now, as for why I replaced that Tapco that I was showing, I generally don't have an issue with, I would say, the vast majority of triggers. I would say I'm the opposite of a trigger snob in most cases, but the Tapco I did have an issue with. It was particularly a bad trigger. It was kind of mushy, not like hugely so, not like some bullpup triggers, but it was a little bit mushy, had a lot of travel, and it was just pretty inconsistent in terms of the pull weight, which is the worst thing. So I did want to get that replaced. This G3 trigger fire control group rather is not that bad. It's not that expensive compared to a lot of the name brand aftermarket triggers available for the AK. At least when I'm recording this video, it's I believe about $40 from Atlantic, and I think they're the only people that sell it currently, Atlantic Firearms. So let's go ahead and just show how this works. So although I'm normally right-handed when I shoot, I'll do this with my left just so you can see this quite a bit better. Here we are. So starting to push on it ever so slightly. Actually, I'll move my finger a bit more. And a very crisp let off there, not mushy at all. And then the reset. Now, one thing I noticed, and I don't know if this is just when I first installed it, maybe something was slightly misaligned, It hasn't been happening in a while, but it is worth mentioning. And I did verify several times just to make sure after I installed this that everything is installed properly. But one thing I noticed is, go ahead and, so hammer is dropped right now. If I go ahead and rack this back, and if I slowly let off of the trigger here, so sometimes it doesn't want to reset. It's kind of slow on the reset if you actually ride it forward. And it's not doing it now. As I said, I haven't been able to kind of force it to do that, but I don't know if something maybe had to wear in a little bit, but it's working now. If you have the same issue, I would love to hear it if you post a comment about it, but also it does seem to have resolved itself, so it's probably not too much of a concern. But we are going to find out if it is an issue at all. I'm going to take this out to the range now, just test how it does with several different brands of ammo. In this magazine itself, I have Vimple, Tula, and Barnaul. So it'll be a good test. Usually when I'm testing AR triggers, I like to test ammo that has a harder primer. In this case, it's all Russian ammo anyway, so it's going to have that harder primer. So not too much to worry about there, but we'll just verify. And I'm going to shoot a bunch both on camera and a whole lot more off camera and just see how this runs, and we'll see if there's any issues. So I'm going to head out there now. So here we are at the range. How I'm going to start testing this is I'm going to start with 5 rounds of Vimple here and then switch to 5 rounds of Klimov's just to make sure there's no major issues. After that, I'm going to switch, and probably not record the whole thing, but I will switch to a few fully loaded magazines I have of just a variety of ammo. As I said earlier, Tula, Barnaul, more Vimple, more Klimov's, and we'll just see how it does. But starting here with this 5. So let's see how this does, and I'll mention if there's any weird things with how this trigger feels that maybe you won't be able to see on the video. Okay, that issue I was mentioning earlier with the reset, it didn't happen. Everything reset just fine, and actually you could probably hear that too on the microphone there. Good. So those all worked well. We're switching to the Klimov's rounds now, which actually should have shown them a bit here. So you can see they're just a lightly lacquered case. Well, perfect. So that issue I was worried about hasn't really come back, so that's good. So all is good with this trigger. Feels good, definitely an improvement over that Tapco. I'm gonna go ahead and get the SLR now. It's a better point of comparison than just saying that it feels better. All right, so let's go ahead and compare this here. So it doesn't really matter, but I'm using just Tula here. So already I can feel there's a lot more take up. The amount I'm pulling here on this Arsenal trigger, pretty much what is only a halfway pull back on this would be enough to set off the other trigger. So as I said earlier, a lot less travel, which is nice. The reset itself is pretty similar in both cases, very positive, which is great. And I can definitely feel that this is a heavier trigger. And there might also be, so pull weight, objectively, that other trigger is lighter. However, there is also some subjective element to it because of the profile of this trigger, which is your standard curved trigger. Generally, the flat triggers, just by how they sit up against your trigger finger, they do tend to feel lighter, even if they're not. But of course, as I said, they are actually different in this case, but certainly an improvement. So I'm gonna go ahead and run the other trigger here. I'll probably put up, just record a little bit of it and just put it up as B-roll footage throughout the rest of the video. But so far so good. And once we get back and kind of conclude the review, we'll let you know if there's any other issues. But go ahead and see right now. So for the rest of the time I was out there at the range, I just did a bunch of basic practice and drills, practice shooting in a bunch of different positions with this setup as it is currently. And that weird issue I mentioned earlier, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but it is a genuine issue, with it not resetting, actually did happen again. However, it only happened once, and this wasn't actually a failure to reset either. This was a very sluggish reset where it took about a second, maybe a second and a half, until it fully went back in. And I didn't even need to pull on the trigger manually on my side or anything either. It just slowly worked its way back in. And the rest of the time I was out there, absolutely no issues with that. But I was still concerned about the issue, so I came home and did a ton of dry fire, and the issue still didn't pop back up. So I did a bit of research, and it sounds like this is more likely related to the springs more than anything else. It's possible that my springs are getting worn out, however I didn't ever see this problem on the Tapco that I had replaced. So I'm not sure if it's that, maybe something was slightly misaligned and it has since aligned properly and maybe it's all good going forward. I'm going to keep testing it, and if things catastrophically fail, I will do an update video, but as things are looking now, the issue hasn't resurfaced in all the dry fire and the rest of the live rounds that I've been firing. So I do think that the issue has solved itself. It is a little bit hard to tell because it has been so rare and inconsistent with how it has occurred. Ultimately, time will tell, but I think it's all good. So aside from that, trigger feels good. It is not too bad, as I said, on travel. It's not totally consistent shot to shot. If you noticed earlier when I put up on the screen the text saying it was about 4.5 pounds plus or minus 0.25 pounds, I am getting a little bit of variance, but it's not bad, and it's not as inconsistent as the Tapco was, so that is good. Unfortunately, I don't have those recorded on what I was getting on the Tapco. I just remember it was quite a bit more variance shot to shot than this one. So all in all, I think the only issue I had with this trigger is probably solved, so I think it's all good. It's not too expensive. If I do have any other issues, I might just try changing out the springs. Again, that's also another thing to keep in mind, is this trigger doesn't come with its own springs, so that is potentially its failure point is because they don't offer their own springs. Kind of using these older springs that might not be working optimally anymore. But as it's running right now, I do think that this trigger is a really good purchase. So one last thing I wanted to end off this video with is to talk about the build itself if you're interested. So all the stuff about the trigger has been covered. So I just wanted to put this here at the end in case you are interested in what I am going to be doing with this rifle. And as you can see, or if you're familiar with the channel, as you can see, there is already some stuff that's changed with this washer, because I've had this on the channel, showed up occasionally in a few videos, and it certainly did not look like this the last time it was here. So changed to a Zukov stock here. This was the first time I ran it, and it's actually quite good. I've always been pretty skeptical of Magpul. I just feel like a lot of their stuff is Magpul stuff is decent, but it's not like incredible. So, and I've had I had a MOE, one of the fixed stocks on here before, and it didn't really work out that well. But this has been holding up really well, so no complaints there. Really, really good stock. I was originally planning to switch to a different flash hider. This is just an old Yankee Hill manufacturing one I got years and years ago. I'm not sure if they even make this one anymore. It's not one it works really well, at least from what I've seen, for actual flash suppression. However, it doesn't even come with a hole, or I shouldn't say a hole, but it doesn't come with anything cut up here for the muzzle device detent pin that most AKs have. As you can see, I actually did Dremel it, and then afterwards I got it cere coated, which is the next part I'll talk about. But then the last thing I'm going to be doing later, and this will be its own video, or probably more than one video, I'm going to be putting a Sure Shot, one of the USA made Mark 2.1 chassis on here. I was going to go with the Mark 3, but the way I'm going to be setting this up, it's pretty much just going to be a backup and practice / training rifle from my SLR 104 FR, just because ammo is a lot easier to get in the 7.62 by 39, and I already have quite a bit on hand, so it works out that way. And I'll just be going with a red dot, so hence why I really don't think I'll need a Mark 3, which has a full rail. And then last, of course, you can see this has been cere coated. The last time it was on the channel, that is definitely the biggest difference, is this was all black. The reason I did it, obviously, I do think it looks quite cool. This is an FDE, a Benelli sand, and field drab 3-color paint job. They did a really great job. I had my local gun store do this. But the primary reason actually that I opted to get the Cerakoted was because I was having some issues with the finish. I've owned this gun for over a decade, I think 12 years now, and I have never used this like particularly hard, but just over time, this does have thousands of rounds through it, and the finish, particularly on the gas tube, was getting pretty worn down. Was seeing some surface rust starting there, and just didn't want any of that to spread. So got all the surface rust cleaned up, and then I got this sent out to get Cerakoted. That way, it did need to get refinished. So it does the job, and then it looks cool as well. Of course, going to be going with the all FDE sort of thing here. So that is the build as it is currently and how I plan to take it. Pretty much the only other thing is just that chassis, which I'm just waiting to get here. So hopefully you all found this interesting, and thanks for sticking through the whole video. Let me know if you have any other questions or comments about anything. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Take care and see you all then.